Hey there. So, we are going over the second half of Lynn Nottage's play, Sweat. And then I'm also going to briefly discuss our next assignment, which is the critical response assignment. So, in Sweat Act 2, we begin with a scene from 2008, just like Act 1 began. And this is when, after Jason and Chris get out of jail, Jason is visiting his mother, Tracy, who is now struggling with drug addiction. Chris visits his mother, Cynthia, and she is no longer a manager at Olmsted's factory, but is working at a nursing home. And she's a little surprised that Chris has become more religious during his time in jail. And we find out that she no longer even speaks with Tracy ever since this crime that Chris and Jason did went down. Then in scene 2, we're back to the year 2000. Everyone at the bar is arguing. Some of the machines at the factory have been taken away, and without machines to operate, the jobs for the workers are no longer there. Cynthia is explaining to the angry group that the management wants to renegotiate their salaries. So, scene 3 takes place the next month, and it's Cynthia's birthday, but there's no one there to celebrate with her. And she's sitting there explaining to Stan how she had to lock out her friends and even her own son from the factory. And when Tracy and Jesse enter, there is a palpable tension between them. Tracy recalls a previous birthday when Cynthia and she were in Atlantic City gambling when Cynthia apparently attacked a woman who was trying to talk to her man, Brucey. So after reminiscing, Tracy asks Cynthia to walk out in solidarity with the striking workers. And Cynthia decides to stay, and we see how racism was part of her decision. So if we look on, let's see, this is on my page 83. Give me a second here to load the page. I'm working with the library text. All right, so Cynthia responds to Tracy's request to walk out. Tracy says, walk out with us. Jesse says, walk out with us. Come on. Cynthia says, I can't. She says, I've stood on that line, the same line since I was 19. I've taken orders from idiots who were dangerous or even worse, racist. But I stood on line, patiently waiting for a break. I don't think you get it, but if I walk away, I'm giving up more than a job. I'm giving up all that time I spent standing on line waiting for one damn opportunity. Tracy says, so you want us to feel sorry for you? Cynthia says, I don't expect you to understand, babe. You don't know what it's been like to walk in my shoes. I've absorbed a lot of shit over the years, but I worked hard to get off that floor. Call me selfish, I don't care. Call me whatever you need to call me. But remember, one of us has to be standing left to fight. So here we see how Cynthia's achievement in management comes after a long struggle, and she's not willing to just give up that opportunity. We know that Cynthia does not retain this management job. Remember, she's in a nursing home uniform when we see her in 2008. So her resistance to joining the strike here in 2000 didn't really help her keep her job in 2008. So then scene 4, Chris and Jason enter the bar to find Brucey strung out and alone. Chris is upset that Brucey's not doing well and still struggling with his drug addiction. And Brucey wants to explain to him what drove him back to drugs. And he said something happened when he was on the picket line. And you'll find this on page 86 in scene 4. Brucey says, I was doing my rotation on the line, same as always, and it began to rain. All at once, a downpour. Folks fled, but I just stood there. Couldn't move. I got soaked through to my skin. I still couldn't move. And finally, someone pulled me into the tent to get dry, but my whole body was still shaking. Wouldn't stop. It was scary. And I hadn't had that feeling of being out of control since my mother died. So Chris buys his dad a drink and reminisces about his father when he was a Union hero. Chris says, "You taught me how to throw a rock. I remember the first time you walked the line." And then Chris and Jason get really excited about standing up to management. Chris says he's not going to be a punk-ass bitch. Brucey has a different opinion. He does not have any fight left in him, and he says to Chris, "You think they give a damn?" Implying that management really doesn't care. So the next is scene 5. That takes place in October, and Stan is speaking with Oscar, who has picked up some part-time shifts at Olsted's. Remember, Olsted's was trying to hire people for less money, and Oscar has been hired. Stan advises him that he shouldn't cross the picket line, and he, like the other characters before him, like Tracy with her German grandpop who could build anything, Brucey and his dad who came north with just a Bible and a razor, Oscar tells a story of how he deserves to be employed there, and we see this on page 91 in scene 5. Oscar says, "Well, I'm sorry about that, but it ain't my problem. I've been trying to get into that shop for 2 years, and each time I asked any of them, I get nothing but pushback. So now I'm willing to be a little flexible, and they ain't." Stan says, "You want my opinion?" Oscar says, "Do I have a choice?" Stan says, "You shouldn't do it." Oscar explains, "They're offering me $3 more per hour than I make here. $3. What they're offering is better than anything I've touched since I got out of high school. So, I ain't afraid to cross the line. Let 'em puff up their chest. But it don't scare me no more than walking through my hood. I know rough. I ain't afraid to roll in the dirt." He continues a little bit later and says to Stan, "Why are you coming at me that way? I'm not disrespecting you. I'm just trying to get paid, that's all. For 3 years I've been carrying nothing but crates. I've got $20 bills taped to my wall and a drawer full of motivational tapes. Got a jar of Buena Suerte from the Botanica and a candle that I keep lit 24/7. I keep asking for some good fortune. That's it. A little bit of money. That's it. My father, he swept up the floor in a factory like Olsted's. Those fuckers wouldn't even give him a union card. But he woke up every morning at 4 a.m. because he wanted a job in the steel factory. It was the American way, so he swept fucking floors, thinking one day they'll let me in. I know how he feels. People come in here every day. They brush by me without seeing me. No, hello, Oscar. If they don't see me, I don't need to see them." So, we see no matter what story of legitimacy they tell, it seems that there's always someone who has a story of why they deserve the employment and are willing to work for less money. Then Tracy comes in and orders a drink. She's been on the picket line and answering phones for the union and has to pay for her drink with loose change. So when she sees Oscar, she has nothing nice to say. She calls him a scab. The term scab refers to someone who crosses a union picket line, meaning, the union workers are on strike and the scabs work in their place, usually for lower pay. So Oscar says he's got no problem with Tracy. It's not personal, but she replies, "You better believe it's personal for me." So then comes scene 6. It's a climactic scene. It takes place the day before Election Day on November 3rd, 2000. Jason and Chris come into the bar after a fight between the union workers on strike and the scabs coming in to replace them. They're both amped up, but Chris is beginning to doubt the effectiveness of the union tactics. He says, now this is on page 98 to 99 in scene 6. He says, "Now is the moment." He says, "You're right, Stan. Maybe we should move on. We can complain until kingdom come, blah, blah, blah. That shit gets old real fast. I'm out here on the picket lines every morning. I shout, fuck you, at a bunch of pathetic, hungry guys. I feel good and superior about it all for like 5 minutes. Then reality hits. They're inside. And then I think about my pops. Who wants that shit? Jason breaks in, yo, if I was, and Chris says, hey, shut up, man. Don't say nothing, Jason, because I swear I will punch you out. And just let me finish, okay? I used to worry about what people would think if I didn't want to work in the factory. Now they got us fighting for scraps. But Stan said it, the writing's on the wall, and we're still out here pretending like we can't read. So Jason doesn't understand what Chris is getting at. Tracy comes out of the bathroom. Jessie rouses. She's, has a sober moment. And they start drinking when Oscar comes in to pick up the rest of his stuff because he no longer works at the bar. It can be assumed that he's now employed by Olsted's. This causes a big increase in tension. Jason and Tracy insult him. Stan tries to keep the peace. One thing that Stan says here is very insightful, but no one seems to hear it. He says on page 101 in scene 6, he says, look, Olsted, hang on, let me find it. Olsted, he says, is a prick. If he was here, I wouldn't stop you. In fact, I'd hold him down for you to give him a proper beating. But Oscar, he's another story. He's going to walk out of here, and you're going to keep your mouth shut. Jason yells, what? All I'm saying is he needs to understand the price of that dinner he's putting on his table. Stan shouts back at him, what the fuck do you want him to do? Huh? It ain't his fault. Talk to Olsted, his cronies, fucking Wall Street. Oscar ain't getting rich off your misery. Unfortunately, no one really hears what Stan is saying here. I think this is an instance of what Brucey called earlier the blame game. Who is at fault for these workers losing their jobs? Stan points to the owner of the company, the one who makes the decisions about where to get their labor force, the ones who make the decisions about moving the machines to Mexico and renegotiating the salaries. Stan's argument, however, falls on deaf ears as Jason is spurred on by his mother and he attacks Oscar. When Chris tries to break it up, he is hit by Oscar, and then that sets him off. So then both of them are fighting him. Then, sadly, when Stan tries to break it up, he's hit twice in the head. Now, there are several contributing causes to this outburst that ends in Oscar being beaten and Stan getting a head injury. I also think these causes are a little different for Jason and Chris. Jason is fighting for himself and his mother, although the aggression may be misdirected. Chris is angry about his own job and what this situation has done to his father. But I think he can see past his anger enough to notice that the scabs are pathetic, hungry guys that are not much different than him. So I think his story is the more tragic one because he's trying to get out of this town and get away from being stuck working at the factory. He wants to go to college and be a teacher. But he's drawn into this conflict and ends up going to jail. So our next scene is in 2008 when Jason and Chris speak with their parole officer, Evan. And then scene 8 is the final scene, and it's a strange reunion of sorts. Notice who's managing the bar? Oscar. Olsted's factory is gone. Chris asks what's on tap, and there's actually something new on tap. Remember, that used to be the common joke because they always had the same stuff on tap. They're serving artisanal beer, something fancy. And now, because the plant is closed, the bar ends up catering mostly to college students. Jason then enters, as well as Stan, who's still working there, but now we see the results of his traumatic brain injury, and he can't get around well, he can't hear very well. The stage directions read, and I quote, that the four men await the next moment in a fractured togetherness. So here they all are again. Oscar's running the bar. They're together, but they're still very much separate. So, what do you make of this ending? I have read of this play being called a tragedy. In the end, everyone loses their job at Olsted's because the factory leaves town. So what do you think is tragic about the ending for this play? So in any case, I hope that in your critical response, you discuss a little bit what you make of this ending and the kind of statement that this play is making, particularly about the causes of racism and racial violence. So, what do you think is this final message? So remember, in your critical response, you're thinking about what this play is saying about race and racism, and what the contributing causes are to racist violence. What are the economic circumstances that contribute to it? And in what way do these economic circumstances contribute to, remember what Brucey calls the blame game, of trying to place blame for one's economic difficulties on someone who is really not at fault. So what is the result of this blame game? So in your critical response, you want to make sure that you have a clear introduction that talks a little bit about the play Sweat, and you have a thesis statement that says what the play's message is about the economic causes for racial violence. And then you want to make sure you have paragraphs with clear main ideas, topic sentences, and you want to use evidence from the play to support your main ideas. Stay away from big block quotes, right? Remember, every time you use a quote in your essay, you should also be analyzing that quote. And then remember, you want to conclude your essay with a statement about, the tragic ending of this play and the kind of, I think the kind of future that this play projects. I think it projects the idea of a rather grim future, especially for the working people in Reading, Pennsylvania. So, in this essay, we're doing what I would consider a more Marxist analysis. Remember, in my introduction to the different types of literary criticism we can perform, when we do a Marxist critique, we look closely at how economic circumstances determine ideas about the world. And we can clearly see in this play how the economic circumstances experienced by Tracy and Cynthia and Brucey and Jason and Chris and Oscar contribute to their idea about their place in the world. So, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the play. This week we do not have a discussion board, we just have our critical response, so I look forward to hearing your ideas.